Hey, greetings everybody, GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we had old Thrall beginning furthering his training. He's young. I want to say he's about 12 now, they said. He's been having a secret little friendship with Taratha through the books he's been reading, and he saw an orc, and he's starting to realize, maybe I don't want to be a slave forever. So stay a while and listen to this one. This is chapter 5 of the novel we're currently reading. This is actually the last full-on novel we are going to read until we're in World of Warcraft territory. Pretty neat. And this is called Lord of the Clans. Here we go. More than a decade had passed since one Lieutenant Blackmore had simultaneously found an orphaned orc and the possible answer to his dreams. Okay, well, this is still putting him at about that 12 range. 12-year-old range. They had been fruitful and happy years for Thrall's master, and for humanity in general. Adelis Blackmore, once lieutenant, now lieutenant general, had been mocked about his pet orc when he had first brought it to Durnhold, especially when it seemed as though the wretched little thing wouldn't even survive. Thank goodness for Mistress Foxton and her swollen teats. Blackmore couldn't conceive of any human female being willing to suckle an orc, but although the offer had increased his contempt for his servant and his family, it had also saved Blackmore's behind, which was why he hadn't begrudged them baubles, food, and education for their child, even if she was a girl. It was a bright day, warm, but not too hot, perfect fighting weather. The awning, bright with its colors of red and gold, provided pleasant shade. Banners of all colors danced in the gentle breeze, and music and laughter floated to his ears. The smell of ripe fruits, fresh bread, and roasted venison teased his nostrils. Everyone here was in a good mood. After the battles, some wouldn't be in such good moods, but right now, all were happy and filled with anticipation. Lying on a chase beside him was his young protege, Lord Caraman Langston. Langston had rich brown hair that matched his dark eyes, a strong, fit body, and a lazy smile. He was also completely devoted to Blackmore, and was the one human being Blackmore had told of his ultimate plans. Though many years his junior, Langston shared many of Blackmore's ideals and lack of scruples. They were a good pair. Langston had fallen asleep in the warm sunshine and snored softly. Blackmore reached over and snagged another bite of roasted fowl and a goblet of red wine, red as the blood that would soon be spilled in the arena, to wash it down with. Life was good, and with every challenge Thrall met and passed, life got even better. After each match, Blackmore left with a heavy purse. His pet orc, once the joke of the fortress, was now his pride. Of course, most of the others that Thrall went up against were nothing more than humans. Some of the meanest, strongest, most cunning humans, to be sure, but humans nonetheless. The other gladiators were all brutal, hardened convicts, hoping to earn their way out of prison by winning money and fame for their patrons. Some did and earned their freedom. Most found themselves in just another jail, one with tapestries on the wall and women in their beds, but it was a prison nonetheless. Few patrons wanted to see their money winners walk as free men. But some of Thrall's adversaries weren't human, and that was when things got exciting. It didn't hurt Blackmore's ambitions at all that the orcs were now a defeated, downtrodden rabble rather than the awesome and fear-inspiring fighting force they had once been. The war was long over, and humans had won the decisive victory. Now the enemy was led into special internment camps almost as easily as cattle into stalls at the end of a day spent grazing. Camps Blackmore mused pleasantly that he was completely in charge of. At first his plan was to raise the orc to be a well-educated loyal slave and a peerless warrior. He would send Thrall to defeat his own people, if people was even the proper term for such mindless green thugs, and once they had been defeated, use the broken clans to his, Blackmore's, own purpose. But the Horde had been defeated by the Alliance without Thrall having even tasted battle. At first, Blackmore had been sour about this, but then another thought came to him on how he could use his pet orc. It required patience, something Blackmore had only in short supply, but the rewards would be far greater than he could have imagined. Infighting was already rampant among the Alliance. Elf sneered at human, human mocked dwarf, and dwarf mistrusted elf. A nice little triangle of bigotry and suspicion. He raised himself from his chair long enough to observe Thrall defeat one of the biggest, nastiest-looking men Blackmore had ever seen. But the human warrior was no match for the unstoppable green beast. The cheers went up and Blackmore smiled. He waved Tamis Foxton over, and the servant hastened to obey. "My lord?" "How many is up today?" Blackmore knew his voice was slurred, but he didn't care. Tamis had seen him drunker than this. Tamis had put him to bed drunker than this. Tamis's prim, anxious face looked even more concerned than usual. "How many what, my lord?" His gaze flickered to the bottle, then back to Blackmore. Sudden rage welled up in Blackmore. He grabbed Tamis by the shirt front and yanked him down to within an inch of his face. "Counting the bottles, you pathetic excuse for a man," he hissed, keeping his voice low. One of the many threats he held over Tamis was public disgrace. Even drunk as Blackmore was, he didn't want to play that particular card quite yet. But he threatened it often as now. Before his slightly swimmy vision, he saw Tamis pale. "You farm out your own wife to suckle monsters, and you dare imply that I have weaknesses." Sickened by the man's pasty face, he shoved him away. "I wanted to know how many rounds Thrall has won." "Oh, yes, of course. Half-dozen, all in a row." Tamis paused, looking utterly miserable. "With all due respect, sir, this last one taxed him. Are you sure you want to put him through 3 more matches?" Idiots. Blackmore was surrounded by idiots. When Sargent had read the order of battles this morning, he too had confronted Blackmore, saying the orc needed at least a few moments of rest, and couldn't they switch the combatant list so that the poor coddled creature could relax? "Oh no, the odds against Thrall go higher with every battle. He's never lost, not once. Of course I want to stop and give all those nice people their money back." Disgusted, he waved Tamis away. Thrall was incapable of being defeated. Why not make hay while the sun shone? Thrall won the next battle, but even Blackmore could see the creature struggling. He adjusted his chair for a better view. Langston imitated him. The battle after that, the 8th of the 9 for which the orc was scheduled, saw something that Blackmore and the crowds had never witnessed. The mighty orc was tiring. The combatants this time were a pair of mountain cats, caught 2 weeks ago, penned, tormented, and barely fed until this moment. Once the door to the arena slid open, they exploded at the orc as if they had been fired from a cannon. Their creamy brown pelts were a blur. As moving as one, they leaped on him, and Thrall went down beneath their claws and teeth. A horrified cry arose among the onlookers. Blackmore sprang to his feet and immediately had to seize his chair in order to keep from falling down. All that money. And then Thrall was up, screaming in rage, shaking the big animals off him as if they were but tree squirrels. He used the 2 swords that were his assigned weapon in this fight with speed and skill. Thrall was completely ambidextrous, and the blades sparkled in the bright sunlight as they whirled and slashed. One cat was already dead, its long lithe body sliced nearly in 2 by a single powerful stroke. The remaining animal, goaded to further rage by the death of its mate, attacked with renewed fury. This time, Thrall did not give it an opening. When the cat sprang, all yowls and claws and teeth, Thrall was ready for it. His sword sliced left, right, and left again. The cat fell in 4 bloody chunks. "Will you look at that?" said Langston happily. The crowd roared its approval. Thrall, who normally welcomed the cries with raised fists and stamped his feet almost until the earth itself shook, merely stood there with stooped shoulders. He was breathing raggedly, and Blackmore saw that the cats had left their mark with several deep bleeding scratches and bites. As he stared at his prized slave, Thrall slowly turned his ugly head and looked straight up at Blackmore. Their eyes met, and in their depths Blackmore saw agony and exhaustion and an unspoken plea. Then Thrall, the mighty warrior, fell to his knees. Again the crowd reacted vocally. Blackmore fancied he even heard sympathy in the sound. Langston said nothing, but his brown eyes were watching Blackmore intently. Damn Thrall. He was an orc, had been fighting since he was 6 years old. Most of his matches today had been with humans, mighty warriors to be sure, but nothing to compare with Thrall's brute strength. This was a ploy to get out of the final round, which Thrall knew would be the toughest of all. Selfish, stupid slave. Wanted to go back to his cozy cell, read his books, and eat his food, did he? Well, Blackmore would teach him a thing or two. At that moment, Sargent trotted onto the field. "Lord Blackmore," he cried, cupping his hands around his bearded mouth, "will you see this last challenge?" Heat flared on Blackmore's cheeks. How dare Sargent do this in front of everyone? Blackmore, who was still standing unsteadily, gripped the back of the chair harder with his left hand. Langston moved unobtrusively to offer aid if he needed it, Blackmore extended his right hand straight out in front of him, then brought the hand over to his left shoulder. No. Sergeant stared at him for a moment as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then he nodded and signaled that this final bout would begin. Thrall climbed to his feet, looking as if he had a ton of stones on his back. Several men scurried onto the field to remove the dead mountain cats and dropped weapons. They handed Thrall the weapon that he was to use for this battle, the Morning Star, a studded metal ball attached by a chain to a thick stick. Thrall took the weapon and tried to draw himself up into a threatening posture. Even at this distance, Blackmore could see that he trembled. Usually before each battle, Thrall stamped on the earth. The steady rhythm both excited the crowd and seemed to help Thrall feel more ready for combat. Today, though, he simply seemed struggling to stay on his feet. One more bout. The creature could handle that. The doors opened, but for a moment nothing emerged from the inner gloom. Then it came, its two heads crying incoherent challenges, its pale body towering over Thrall, as Thrall towered over humans. It had only one weapon as Thrall did, but it was a superior one for this battle, a long, deadly-looking spear. Between the length of its arms and the shaft of the spear, the ogre would be able to reach Thrall from much farther away. Thrall would need to get in close in order to strike any kind of a blow, let alone a winning one. This was so unfair.
"Who gave the ogre that spear?"
Blackmore bellowed to Langston.
"You ought to have something at least similar to what Thrall has been given."
Blackmore conveniently chose not to remember all the times that Thrall had been equipped with a broadsword or spear himself, and his human opponents had had to make do with a short sword or axe. The ogre marched into the circular arena like a machine of war rather than a living, breathing being. He stabbed forward with his spear, one head turned toward the crowd, one head facing Thrall. Thrall had never seen one of these creatures before, and for a moment simply stood staring at it. Then he rallied, drew himself up to his full height, and began to swing the Morning Star. He threw back his head, tangled, long black hair brushing his back, and let loose with a howl to match the ogre's bellowing. The ogre charged, stabbing forward with the spear. There was no finesse in his movements, only brute strength. Thrall easily ducked the clumsy charge, slipped underneath the ogre's defenses, and swung hard with the Morning Star. The ogre cried out and slowed as the spike ball struck him heavily in the midsection. Thrall had dashed past and now whirled to attack again. Before the ogre could even turn around, Thrall had struck him in the back. The ogre fell to his knees, dropping the spear and reaching to clutch his back. Blackmore smiled. Surely that had broken the miserable creature's spine. These fights weren't necessarily to the death. In fact, killing one's opponent was frowned on as it reduced the pool of good fighters. But everyone knew that dying was a very real possibility in this ring. Healers and their salves couldn't fix everything, and Blackmore couldn't manage to find any sympathy at all for an ogre. But his pleasure was short-lived. Even as Thrall began to swing the Morning Star again, gathering momentum, the ogre lurched to his feet and seized the dropped spear. Thrall swung the Morning Star at the creature's head. To the crowd's amazement, and obviously to Thrall's as well, the ogre simply extended a big hand and batted the spike out of the way while shoving forward with the spear. The Morning Star flew from Thrall's hand. He was knocked off balance and could not recover in time. Even as he desperately tried to twist out of the way, the spear impaled him high in the chest, a few inches from his left shoulder. He screamed in agony. The ogre continued to shove as he approached, and the spear went completely through Thrall's body. He fell backward and was pinned to the earth. Now the ogre fell atop him, pummeling the hapless orc madly and uttering horrible grunts and squeals. Blackmore stared in horror. The orc was being beaten, as helpless as a child beneath the onslaught of a bully. The gladiator ring, a showcase for the finest warriors in the kingdom to compete against one another using strength, skill, and cunning, had been reduced to nothing more than one weak monster being beaten to a pulp by another bigger one. How could Thrall have let this happen? Men now hastened onto the field. With sharpened sticks, they prodded the ogre, trying to goad him into leaving off his prey. The brute responded to the taunts, abandoning a bloody Thrall and chasing after the men. 3 others tossed a magical net, which immediately shrank to engulf the raging ogre and compress his flailing limbs close to his body. He thrashed now like a fish out of water, and the men, not at all gently, hauled the creature onto a cart and took him out of the ring. Thrall too was being carried out, though with much more gentleness. Blackmore's patronage assured that, but Blackmore realized that he had lost every penny he had bet on Thrall today because of this single fight. Many of his companions had done likewise, and he could feel the heat of their furious glares as they reached for their purses to pay their debts. Thrall, Thrall, Thrall. Thrall lay gasping on the straw that served him as a bed. He had never known such pain existed, nor such exhaustion. He wished he would fall unconscious. It would be so much easier. Nonetheless, he would not let the welcoming blackness overtake him. The healers would be here soon. Blackmore always sent them after Thrall had been injured in a bout. Blackmore also always came to visit him, and Thrall eagerly awaited the comforting words of his master. He had lost the battle, true, and that was a first, but surely Blackmore would have nothing but praise for how well he had fought 9 bouts in a row. That was unheard of, Thrall knew. Thrall also knew he could have beaten the ogre if he had been matched against him in the first bout or the third or even the 6th, but no one could expect him to win after a record-breaking 8 bouts. He closed his eyes as pain seared him. The hot burning in his chest was nigh unbearable. Where were the healers? They should have been here by now. He knew his injuries were bad this time. He estimated he had several broken ribs, a broken leg, several sword slashes, and of course the dreadful hole in his shoulder where the spear had impaled him. It would have to come soon if Thrall were to be able to fight again tomorrow. Thrall heard the lock open, but could not lift his head to see who entered his cell.
The healers will be here,
came Blackmore's voice. Thrall tensed. The voice was slurred and dripped with contempt. His heart began to speed up. Please, not this time. Not now.
Well, they won't be here any time soon. I want to see you suffer, you poxy son of a whore.
And then Thrall gasped in torment as Blackmore's boot kicked him in the stomach. The pain was incredible, but not nearly as searing as the shock of betrayal that shuddered through him. Why would Blackmore strike him when he was so badly injured? Did he not see how well Thrall had fought? Though the pain threatened to cause him to lose consciousness, Thrall raised his head and stared at Blackmore with blurred vision. The man's face was contorted in anger, and even as Thrall met his eyes, Blackmore struck him soundly across the face with a mailed fist. Everything went black for an instant, and then when Thrall could next hear, Blackmore was still railing.
There's thousands, you hear me? Thousands! What is the matter with you? It's one pathetic little fight!
He was still raining blows on Thrall, but Thrall was starting to drift away. He felt as if his body only vaguely belonged to him, and the kicks Blackmore delivered felt more and more like taps. He felt blood sticky on his face. Blackmore had seen him. He knew how exhausted Thrall had been, had watched him rally again and again and again to hold his own 8 out of 9 times. There was no way anyone could have expected Thrall to win that fight. Thrall had fought with everything he had, and he had lost fairly and honorably, and yet that was not good enough for Blackmore. Finally, the blows stopped. He heard the steps at Blackmore's left, as Blackmore left in a single phrase.
Let the others have their turn.
The door did not close. Thrall heard more footsteps. He could not raise his head again, though he tried. Several pairs of black military boots appeared in front of him. Thrall now realized what Blackmore had ordered. One boot drew back slightly, then swung forward, kicking Thrall in the face. His world went white, then black. Then he knew no more. Thrall awoke to warmth and a cessation of the agony that had been his companion for what seemed like an eternity. 3 healers were working on him, using their salve to heal his wounds. Breathing was much easier, and he guessed his ribs had been healed. They were administering the sweet-smelling, gooey stuff to his shoulder now. Clearly that was the most difficult wound. Although their touches were gentle and their salve brought healing, there was no real compassion in these men. They healed him because Blackmore paid them to do so, not out of any real desire to ease suffering. Once he had been more naive and had thanked them sincerely for their efforts. One of them looked up startled at the words. A sneer had curled his lips.
Don't flatter yourself, monster. Once the coins stop flowing, so does the salve. Better not lose.
He had winced from the unkind words then, but they did not bother him now. Thrall understood. He understood many things. It was as if his vision had been cloudy and a thick fog had suddenly lifted. He lay quietly until they had finished, then they rose and left. Thrall sat upright and was surprised to see Sargent standing there, his hairy arms folded across his broad chest. Thrall did not speak, wondering what new torment was coming.
I pulled them off you, said Sargent quietly, but not before they had their sport. Blackmore had some business he needed to talk with me about. I'm sorry for that, lad. I'm right sorry. You amazed me in the ring today. Blackmore ought to be prouder than hell of you instead.
His gruff voice trailed off.
Well, I wanted to make sure you knew that you didn't deserve what he did. What they did. You did fine, lad. Just fine. Better get some sleep.
He seemed about to say something more, then nodded and left. Thrall lay back down, absently noting that they had changed the straw. It was fresh and clean, no longer clotted with his blood. He appreciated what Sargent had done and believed the man, but it was too little too late. He would not let himself be used like this any longer. Once he would have cringed and vowed to be better, to do something to earn the love and respect he so desperately craved. Now he knew he would never find it here, not so long as Blackmore owned him. He would not sleep. He would use this time to plan. He reached for the tablet and stylus he kept in the sack and wrote a note to the only person he could trust, Tari. On the next dark moons, I plan to escape. All right. That was a bit brutal, but we got to see him in the ring, which was also kind of cool. And we're getting up to the part. I mean, he's got to escape in order to eventually become the Lord of the Clans and meet up with Wargrim and everything. All right, we got this episode in the pipe, 5x5. Probably we'll see the escape either in the next chapter or the one after that. Thank you, everybody. I thank you. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully you're learning a little bit, because I sure am. See you next time on Lore of Warcraft.